got a job offer to make 20,000 rupees per day from home recently? I have. I've also been offered enrollment in top universities for MBA courses and lakhs of pre-qualified loans for personal and home categories. The amount of spam Indians are facing is no longer just an irritation. It's an assault. It's an avalanche of information that consumes your time and in some cases can also be used to scam you. The Telecom Regulatory Authority or the TRAI is the watchdog of the sector, and they have now directed telecom operators to remove telemarketers who are not registered on their platform and scrub out those who are sending messages from 10-digit numbers. Essentially, only registered companies can now send messages. But frankly, that's like a drop in the ocean. The fact is that even registered telemarketers are spamming us. For example, your bank that should be only sending you account alerts because that's what's useful for you, is also busy sending you new investment schemes that you didn't ask for. Or your telecom company, which should be sending you just your bill, but also keeps offering some free add-on card, SIM card that you don't want. Or the company that has to confirm your order, but wants to send you new offers constantly as well. And what about callers? The TRAI has threatened to fine pesky callers. They've claimed it will develop an app to identify who is calling. But none of that has really happened. What's worse is these calls are now being used to scam people and sometimes clean out bank accounts. But will now TRAI's new measures help? It seems unlikely. Let's just tell you the extent of the problem. A survey by local circles conducted recently shows that 66% of respondents get 3 or more spam calls daily. 68% get 4 or more spam messages daily. Why can't this be stopped? And are TRAI's actions enough? To speak on this, I'm joined now by Mahesh Uppal, Telecom Expert, Dr Satya N Gupta, ex-principal advisor of the TRAI. Sachin Taparia, founder of localcircles.com, is with me on the show, as is Kanishk, Gaur, technology expert. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Mr. Uppal, let me begin with you. You've seen this sector through and through. It's as if the TRAI is just unable to stop this menace, not for the lack of identifying it. There are tons of papers and, asking people for their views on what to do. Directives come, press releases come, like the one we're discussing today. Why doesn't it really help? And do you think the latest one will?
Well, Tamanna, the main reason why it doesn't help is because it's the scale of the problem. It's just, as you pointed out in your own report, the number of such messages and the number of culprits sending those messages is really quite phenomenal. And the truth of this is that the TRAI can do a limited amount of interventions when it comes to registered telemarketers. When it comes to unregistered telemarketers who call you and me from numbers similar to ours, there is mighty little that you and I can do about it, because it's just some people who presumably for some payment are calling people, sending messages, etc., which are very annoying and often intended to scam us. But imagine the scale of the imagine how easy or difficult it would be for anybody. You see, for instance, a user cannot just recognize a number and say, well, this looks like a scam or this looks like a telemarketing call, then I won't take it. Now that's become even more difficult to do, because routinely all of us get calls from unknown numbers simply for people who come to deliver, let's say, a packet from one of the e-commerce companies.
Absolutely. So, you can't even avoid it because you'll miss that call and then your packet wouldn't have come through.
Precisely.
So you have to pick up unknown numbers.
Exactly. So now actually the situation has actually got much worse. And the TRAI, both in terms of the powers it has, but more important, it is not that easy either for the telecom operator or you and me or the TRAI to do much about it. Because as was pointed out by one of our guests on our show, and I don't want to steal his thunder, but there is technology available to try and do something about it. And I don't think even that is a foolproof method of doing it. But the more important thing is that it costs a huge amount of money, which the telecom companies have neither the incentive nor the resources to fund. And therefore, the problem remains very, very intractable. My own fear, like probably yours, as you indicate in your report, is that this whole thing will not really amount to much. The problem will remain. And I think we will be left to our devices. We will have to keep blocking numbers that we receive awful calls from or unwelcome calls from. And I suspect in the absence of serious technology, and I'm sure Mr. Gupta will expand on that, in the absence of those technologies, there is very little one can do. And I think the TRAI must have no illusions about it.
I think one very important line from what Mr. Mahesh Uppal said, are telecom operators incentivized to actually invest in the technology that can save you this hassle? Now, you right now have some smartphones have the software where it shows you the identity of who's called. There's also an app, like Truecaller and others, which can tell you the identity of who's calling, but it's not foolproof, right? It depends on how someone else has saved that number, and you could miss an important call. Sachin Taparia, what the TRAI has said now seems to be a very minimal kind of a move. They're just saying that non-registered telemarketers can no longer send you messages. On the whole scale of the problem, how much is that going to help?
So it will be of some help, Tamanna, but not too much. Primarily being, because a lot of these telemarketers essentially are using numbers or handles that look similar to what looks like an official handle, and therefore it'll be extremely difficult to identify these telemarketers and be able to stop them. So the registered ones,
give us a for example.
Yes, you'll be
Sachin,
able
just
to
give us a for example of this. Give us a for example of this.
So, an example, a very simple example basically is, one of the banks. If your bank is contacting you with some kind of an offer or some kind of, messaging, you basically tend to look at that, at that particular handle. But if, somebody created a handle which looked similar to your ICICI or Citibank, basically, it's very hard for people to distinguish, between that handle and the original official handle. So that happens, all the time, where you'll get, 3 or 4 different handles sending you messages, and you need to kind of be smart enough to figure out, which one to refer to and which one to ignore. And this is where, you have the risk of fraud. Like you're putting on the screen, an example of Chase, card, right? So I think that is something, overall, it'll be some help, but not too much. So what is really needed is the feedback system, and that feedback system is something what is missing. It's not easy enough. And I think that is where we need a single, click feedback system that all operators must implement, where somebody goes on their SMS and they can basically say, report junk, just like you have on email, report junk, right? And that message then goes back to the operator saying, if enough people have marked the sender as a spammer and hence block them, right? So that system is needed for the messaging to, for the spam actually to reduce in messaging. The calling and the pesky callers is a whole different matter altogether, which again needs a much more advanced feedback system, which is integrated, with Aadhaar ideally, because these calls are coming from individual callers much more then registered telemarketers.
We've all seen the series and the movies and the episodes on how you have a whole sort of segment of people sitting and making these spam calls and defrauding people. Even if they're not defrauding you, they're eating up precious moments of your life by giving you products you do not want. Kanishk, great to have you on my show. Tell me how Kanishk, Gaur, how we can really help ourselves. Because clearly leaving it to the TRAI is not helping. This is not a new problem. And this is the nth sort of missive that has come from the TRAI with some 30-day deadline. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of 30 days. Is there any real relief? I frankly cannot tell viewers right now that you're going to find real relief in 30 days.
No, absolutely, Tamanna. This is too late and too little. You could use wider technology solutions. Today, you require an open source platform which can collate all this data from different telecom service providers, even messaging platform, to find out which are the fraudulent companies and telemarketers who are operating and doing these scams. What you require is greater collaboration and mechanisms for doing KYC. So when I go to a developed country, I have to do a KYC sharing one of my social identity proofs. It could be my driving license, it could be my passport. But when I take a new number in India and I register, there is no way to verify. I just pull up a CAF form and I get a new number. Those CAF forms are used with fake IDs, fake Aadhaar numbers, fake driving licenses. So a mechanism where people can upload and verify their identity is something which is the need of the hour. And when you've got such large databases in the country, which includes Aadhaar, election databases, the government needs to use some of these databases to create these platforms. And since they have majority of stakes with one of the large telecom service providers today, I think it's the right time for government to take this seriously, because cybercrime today is the third largest economy after US and China. And mind you, it is not just hurting the pockets of the consumers, it is also hurting the pockets of banks, financial institutions, because people don't know.
No, but it's not just cyber crime. Kanishk, you're talking about cyber crime. What about the mental despair of fielding calls and, losing your cool? And I feel bad for the people on the other side. I'm going to take this opportunity to apologize to those who I may have been caught with. I know you're doing your job. But sometimes it's really the 17th call for a personal loan is something that you just cannot take beyond a point. It's really, is there nothing to protect me? Is there nothing to protect me as a consumer?
Absolutely. And there have to be mechanisms where you can tell your bank that you don't need a credit card and you don't need a personal loan. So you don't want people to actually call you and they invade your privacy. So that is the mechanism that is required, and there have to be norms so that this can be followed on ground, because your own bank calls you for so many things which you don't want, right? So a way to put out do not disturb, which is actually applicable on ground, is the need of the hour. The current guideline, I don't think so will really help, because there are already so many problems.
Sure. I want to understand from Mr. Gupta. Dr. Satya Gupta is with us. He was former principal advisor to TRAI. So many years ago, there was something called the DND registry, the Do Not Disturb registry. So this was put out by the TRAI. Why has it collapsed? Why has it absolutely collapsed?
Yeah, thank you, Tamanna ji. Actually, now we have discussed it also. To start with DND registry, yeah, that was an attempt made long back during 2018. Someone suggested to TRAI there is a technology called blockchain, and they named it distributed ledger technology, and that can solve your problem because nothing else was working. This attempt has been made for last 20 years. So 2018, they did consultation and issued a directive to the service provider that you please stop all these things and use this technology, blockchain, DLT. A effort was made, but even now it has not actually helped fully, though it made a beginning. Actually, the solution of this problem, as you see the magnitude and its impact and side effects, actually, all these things, it needs three things now. One is the collaboration, which all of us are talking, collaboration between government, regulator, service provider, telemarketers, and we the sufferer, actually, the victims, all these things. Second thing, you need a technology. Luckily, it is there. The DLT actually powered by AI and ML. Actually, you have to use a combination of blockchain and AI ML. If both you use, then there is no problem which cannot be solved. But one thing remains, and that is the investment, that who will fit the bill, basically. And now what TRAI have done in 2018 directive, and a part of that was reiterated now after 4 years, actually, which is only 1/4 of the part. It is only messages and only unregistered telemarketer messages have to be blocked, who are using 10 digits. So now it needs a lot of money. Actually, you have to create a national public infrastructure kind of thing based on DLT, where it will be a platform where each stakeholders, like as a user, as a victim, I register there and say,
is it impossible?
I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this.
One minute, Gupta ji, is it impossible? Because, you know, if you're going to leave it to me as the user, frankly, मेरा दिन निकल जाएगा ब्लॉक करते हुए.
नहीं, वो एक ही बार आपको, अगर वो बन जाती है रजिस्ट्री, वो प्लेटफॉर्म एक ही बार आपको कहना है व्हाट यू विश टू रिसीव, व्हाट यू
तो ये रजिस्ट्री क्यों नहीं बन पा रही?
वो तो एक ही बार कहना, बट मेन है फिर वो उस हर एक का काम उससे हो जाएगा. दैट इज व्हाट इज रिक्वायर्ड एक्चुअली. अगर आपको इसको पूरे को सोल्व करना है, हर एक का कोऑपरेशन चाहिए. एज ए विक्टिम, आई आल्सो शुड एक्चुअली बी रेडी टू स्पेंड माय, लेट अस से इफ इट नीड्स हाफ एन आवर to register there and say this I don't want, that I don't want. इतना तो करना ही पड़ेगा, मतलब everyone have to cooperate. But that is not the only thing required. This platform setting by the government, because आप इसको operator को बोल दो कि भाई आप fund करो इसे. Already there is a regulatory levies on the operator, as you know. और regulatory cost इतनी है, it goes up to 30% of their revenue. और अगर ये पूरा प्लेटफॉर्म उनको सेटअप करने का बोला गया, जैसे रेगुलेशन में और डायरेक्टिव में यही कहा गया आपको करना है, इसीलिए वो मिनिमम करते हैं जितना उनको बोला जाता है. That is called cutting the
okay, no, so how does this get fixed? 1 minute. How will this get fixed? Sachin Taparia is nodding. Sachin Taparia, so now I've still not understood, frankly. So what am I supposed to do? At the end of this discussion, the least we should provide is some solution to people. So can you tell me, suppose I am the aggrieved party here, which not supposed I am, what should I do, Mr. Taparia?
So, Tamanna, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. So, I think here, really, I don't understand the whole conversation about big investment, being needed here. I think the key here is that, the 3 operators that we have in the country need to basically ensure that a user can mark a caller as a spam caller on the call log. Basically, when you get a phone call, you say, just like you do it on Truecaller, you mark that caller as a spam caller. These different operators need to transmit this data into a central database, and I may be simplifying here, into a central database which basically has every caller listed in there essentially, which is hosted by TRAI. And once you have enough red marks against a caller, and that logic can be defined, that if you get 5 calls from this particular number and 5 people have marked that guy as a spammer, then basically level 1 kicks in. Level 1 means you don't do any outbound calls for the next 24 hours. Level 2 means you don't get outbound calls for next 1 week. Just like they block people when you don't pay your bill, just like that you block these users. And level 3 is that it is escalated and it is connected to your Aadhaar number, because the callers here are all personal callers who are calling from their numbers. And what you have to do is basically tell them that the government is serious about solving it.
No, what about misuse? I don't like someone and I've marked them as spam.
So again, that can be handled with logic, Tamanna, that if the first condition can be that as a user, I have made 5 phone calls. There is an audit trail with my operator that I have made those calls, right? So if I have made those calls, 10 calls in a matter of 2 hours, basically, right? Nobody who doesn't like me or dislike me, that's not the question. I have made those calls. That proof is there, that audit trail is there. Right. So I think with that logic and a few more bits to it, something like this can be designed. It's not rocket science.
I think we
It's
need
not rocket
willingness, we
science,
need
Mahesh
commitments.
Uppal. It's not rocket science. Is it a lack of commitment? Is it, frankly, it's a cozy club, isn't it? Because you know that people need to read your messages and you need to reach out to people for the services you provide, as more and more services have gone online. So you do need that communication and that corridor of communication. Who's to stop that from being misused? Is it really technologically so difficult and so expensive to roll out?
Yeah, Tamanna, let me tell you, actually, what Sachin have mentioned exactly same. What he
No,
wants.
the question was for Mahesh Uppal. That question's for
Okay.
Mr. Mahesh Uppal. Let me just hear him out, please. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. You see, the problem is it's not the logic part of it. It's not the common sense part of it. It is simply the scale of it. We are talking literally of crores of calls, right? And as you indicated, there is a huge scope for misuse. Misuse, not that currently we are faced with abuse by awful telemarketers, but there will also be abuse by individuals. In fact, I'm sure you must have experienced that too. I have Truecaller and occasionally, quite often actually, get calls which are marked spam but are actually a service provider. In fact, I'm expecting, let's say, a packet from, let's say, an e-commerce person, and most probably this person who's calling me to, find out if I'm around or whatever, is being marked as spam because somebody else didn't like the guy or whatever. The point is that what we need is a system which is transparent, which is fair, which is legal, which is implementable, which is enforceable. Now, those things are not trivial. This is a huge issue because a large number of telemarketers also will have all kinds of defenses. For example, when you, let's say, take a loan to buy a car, you probably sign 10 papers, including some which say that you're happy to receive a promotional material from the lender. Right now, that will count as your agreement to accept these calls. The point I'm making is not that the problem is small or that we are overstating it. The point is that when you want to do it legally, fairly, just with the sense of transparency, it's not going to be easy. And
so
we must
Mr.
have no
Uppal,
illusions.
can you explain what happened to the DND? It launched in 2007. Why has it not helped close the floodgates? Because ideally, that's something you should be able to do, right, as an individual?
Yes. Well, DND, by definition, can work only with registered telemarketers, right? And I'm not sure, I've not really seen sufficient evidence to suggest that the rogue players are the registered telemarketers sending calls to people who have opted not to have it. The real problem is not them, as we've said. The real problem is the guys who are not, who the DND cannot address because they are not a part of the registered telemarketing. So the DND is actually unworkable for the vast majority of calls that you and I receive. And that is really where the problem is. DND is a very small subset of telemarketers who will be covered by DND.
So see, Dr. Gupta, you wanted to come in. So DND has not worked. People are using individual numbers to make these calls. Frankly, a lot of the companies, and here those who are, unleashing this telemarketing horror on us, have to take responsibility. They don't do it themselves. These big brands don't do it themselves. They outsource it to some little shop which is not a registered telemarketer, where people are sitting and, calling you incessantly. They are not actual representatives of the company. And that way, there's no trail. Isn't that the case, Dr. Gupta?
Yeah, Tamanna ji, actually, that is what I was trying to tell, like what Sachin ji mentioned and also Mahesh ji also mentioned, actually two things. One is there is a process required, which looks very simple. It has been simplified. And technically, it is very simple actually, but still you need a infrastructure and a investment. The infrastructure, just blockchain only, where what Sachin is mentioning, all those will be algorithm will be put, all those validation will happen, everything, it can be done. So that is there. But because of the scale, we have 1.2 billion customers, actually subscribers like us, and there are maybe 6 to 10 million telemarketers who are registered. And unregistered, theoretically, all 1.2 billion can be unregistered telemarketers. So you see the scale now. Now, even if you do all these simple process using blockchain and added by AI ML, of course, that is required. If you can put all these things together, the scale of the investment becomes huge. But government can actually afford that. And they should do. It is a national problem, national menace now. It should not be left only to the operators, actually, who cannot afford if the investment is required and if a regulatory burden is put on them. So it is a market failure in that sense. And so if there is a market failure, government have to come in actually. And if it is a public good, actually, public service is actually here, and
Right.
so much is
You know,
at stake actually.
I wonder how many of our top netas get spam calls, or do they have PAs to
All
pick
of
up their
them,
calls?
all
No,
of
but
them,
their
Tamanna, you know,
PAs are picking up their calls.
FM, Mr. Peach Damram got a call in Parliament that, sir, do you want a home loan? Do you know that? So that is what happened actually. So
When
all
he
these
was
things
finance
people are
minister.
getting. Many times I am sitting with the ministers and he
Tamanna, I
gets
want to come in here.
the call.
Yes. Yes, the
Yeah.
ministers are getting the call. Why aren't they doing something for themselves and us? Yes, Kanishk.
Tamanna, we've built up some fantastic databases, and India today is the lead for G20, and we are talking about digital public infrastructure. We set up the CoWIN app in a very minimal period. Why can't we create something very similar on digital public infrastructure, which could be used for blocking telemarketers and verifying, some of these accounts? That's something that could be innovative, and I think we have the technology. We have got, the stack which we built on UPI. We can use open source technology. So it's something actually the government has to take on priority. But I think it's primarily the lack of willingness to build something like this. If there is willingness, technology has never been a showstopper, at least in our country. We've got the largest number of digital payment users. We've got the largest UPI Aadhaar stack. We've got the largest number of, digital identity in the world. So primarily I see this being one of the...
But in all of this, 1 minute, Kanish, can I just point out something? In all of this digital sort of advancements we've made, data has become even more freely available. It's everywhere. You are today as an individual leaving digital footprints everywhere. Plus, people are asking you for your number. If you want to buy something from a shop, apparently they need it for billing. If you want to eat in a restaurant, I don't know, even if you want to breathe, someone wants your number for it. Where do you think all that data is going? So it's counterproductive.
All that data is going to these telemarketers, and it is being sold.
Absolutely.
It is being sold for specific value.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
maybe can I come in for a minute?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah, you see, one of the other things that we haven't addressed is also the incentives, a point that I tried to make right in the beginning. The operator per se has no incentive to actually reduce these calls, because remember, all these calls are paid calls. So we have to recognize that for this, really somebody outside of the operator will have to do this, and something like what Mr. Gupta is also mentioning, that eventually we will have to see this as a problem of market failure, and it'll have to be dealt with by regulators and government in consultation, and they will have to make the investment. And as Kanishk has pointed out, I mean, we have all the expertise when it comes to software and all the rest of it. But to expect the telcos to do this, I think, is being very unrealistic, because they really have no great incentive in doing that.
Think of it the other way around. Most people are now not making calls. They're using apps, messaging apps, and even making free calls on messaging apps. You can now make free calls on messaging apps. So the only people who are making paid calls are those who do it for a living, perhaps.
Absolutely.
You know, or when they don't have any other choice. So you're asking telecom companies who, get a lot of their revenue from telemarketers to shut them down. Well, it's never going to happen.
Exactly. So that is why we need responses which are outside of that system. It'll have to be
Absolutely.
from.
Well, I hope, something happens on this in the interim. Maybe go back to that DND registry and see if that helps. Get in apps that help you identify who's calling. But even then, there's no guarantee that you'll escape the next spam call and not miss an important call that you actually need. Till then, you just have to grin and bear it. Well, thank you to all of you for joining us on the big discussion this evening on the show. We'll take a very short break, but when we come